Black homeless veteran humiliated in court. Judge Vanessa Brighton, 22, youngest in district history, humiliates homeless veteran in packed courtroom. Her condescending laughter, dismissing his military service, calling him mentally incompetent. Little did she know, she was about to face the most important case of her life. Have you ever said something so cruel that it came back to destroy everything you thought you knew about yourself? Comment below. Enjoy the story. Tuesday morning in courtroom 7B started like any other day for Judge Vanessa Brighton. At 22, she wore her title like armor, the youngest judge in district history. Her fuchsia blazer blazed under the harsh lights, a declaration that she belonged in that elevated chair despite every whisper suggesting otherwise. The whispers never stopped. Daddy's money, too young, inexperienced. But Vanessa had learned to silence doubt with authority. Swift decisions. No nonsense rulings. Today's docket promised easy victories. Traffic violations, minor disputes, and one homeless veteran who'd supposedly disturbed the peace. The defendant shuffled and wearing clothes that screamed defeat. Marcus Wilson, according to her files, another broken soldier story. She'd seen dozens like him. Lost souls who couldn't handle civilian life, drowning in excuses about trauma and mental health. What caught her attention was his lawyer. Jackson Hayes looked expensive, his tailored suit worth more than most people's monthly rent. Why would a high-end attorney represent some homeless nobody? Your Honor, the prosecutor began. Mr. Wilson was found sleeping in a business doorway, refusing to leave when... Objection! Hayes interrupted. My client was experiencing a PTSD episode triggered by aggressive security guards. Vanessa's practiced smile emerged, sharp as broken glass. Mr. Hayes, unless you have actual medical documentation, I suggest sticking to facts instead of sob stories. Half the homeless population claims PTSD these days. The courtroom stirred. Hayes' jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. Your Honor, my client served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Mr. Hayes, her voice cut through the room like a blade. This court deals with legal reality, not fairy tales about military service. She turned to the defendant, studying his weathered face with obvious disdain. Despite his circumstances, Marcus Wilson stood with military precision, his dark eyes holding something she couldn't quite place. Mr. Wilson, she said, condescension dripping from every word. Do you even understand what's happening here? Can you comprehend the charges against you? Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Forgive me if I doubt that. Vanessa continued, warming to her performance. Mr. Hayes, perhaps you should consider having your client evaluated for mental competency. This court cannot allow someone who is clearly... Your Honor. Hayes was standing now, something desperate flickering in his ice-blue eyes. I request permission to introduce evidence not currently on the docket. Little did she know, she was about to face the most important case of her life. Power corrupts, but privilege? Privilege destroys. Judge Brighton had built her reputation on quick, decisive rulings that left no room for excuses or sob stories. Her courtroom ran like clockwork, efficient, ruthless, profitable for the system that kept her in power. She perfected the art of looking through people rather than at them. Defendants became case numbers. Stories became statistics. Human suffering became administrative inconvenience. The homeless were her specialty. Quick sentencing, minimal fuss, maximum throughput. Why waste time on people who'd already wasted their lives? Her colleagues praised her efficiency. Her statistics impressed the district attorney. Her methods cleared the dockets that other judges found too depressing to handle. Behind her bench, Vanessa had created a kingdom where her word was law and her prejudices were policy. She'd learned early that showing mercy was perceived as weakness, and weakness was something a 22-year-old female judge couldn't afford. Her court clerk, David, had watched her transformation over the past year. The bright-eyed law graduate who'd started with hopes of changing the system had morphed into something harder, colder. He'd seen her dismiss veterans, ignore mental health pleas, and treat poverty like a personal choice. David never spoke up, never challenged her decisions. His job was to maintain the schedule, not question the judge's methods. He told himself he was just following orders, just doing his job, just staying out of trouble. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered what happened to the woman who'd once promised to serve justice for everyone, not just those who could afford it. Vanessa's treatment of Marcus Wilson wasn't unusual. It was standard procedure. Another homeless veteran, another quick disposal, another cleared case for her perfect statistics. She'd made an art form of humiliation disguised as legal procedure. Her questions weren't designed to determine guilt or innocence. They were crafted to establish dominance, to remind everyone who held power in that room. What she didn't realize was that power built on cruelty has a way of crumbling when confronted with truth. And truth was about to walk into her courtroom, wearing a homeless man's rags and carrying secrets that would shatter her world. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear threadbare coats and carry invisible wounds. Marcus Wilson stood in that courtroom with the bearing of a man who'd faced far worse than one judge's contempt. 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught him about real enemies, not the kind who attacked from elevated benches with gavels and legal degrees. At 55, his body showed the wear of military service and 8 years on the streets. His dark skin bore scars both visible and hidden, but his eyes, those eyes held depths that spoke of command, sacrifice, and a strength that homelessness couldn't break. He'd learned to endure the stares, the assumptions, the casual cruelty of people who saw his circumstances but not his service. Every day brought fresh humiliation from those who'd never held a rifle, never made life or death decisions, never carried the weight of soldiers' lives on their shoulders. But Marcus had also learned something else during his years of invisibility: how to observe, how to listen, how to see what others missed. He'd watched Judge Brighton during previous hearings from the gallery, seen her dismiss veterans with the casual indifference of someone who'd never understood sacrifice. Her pattern was predictable: quick judgment, harsh sentences, no consideration for circumstances beyond charges. Yet something about her nagged at his memory. The way she adjusted her pendant when nervous. The particular shade of her defiance. The familiar cadence of her voice when she was trying to sound older than her years. Jackson Hayes had approached him 3 weeks ago with an unusual proposal. "I want to represent you," the expensive lawyer had said, "but not for the reasons you think." Hayes had his own reasons for taking the case, his own history with military justice, his own scores to settle with a system that chewed up veterans and spit them out. But he'd also recognized something in Marcus's case that went deeper than trespassing charges. "Trust me," Hayes had said, his ice blue eyes intense with purpose. "This isn't just about clearing your name. This is about reminding someone who they used to be." Now, standing before Judge Brighton's bench, Marcus felt the weight of more than just his own fate. Somewhere in that harsh young woman was an echo of someone he'd once known, someone he'd once believed in. Someone who'd once believed in justice for more than just the privileged and powerful. The truth was about to surface, and with it, a reckoning 15 years in the making. There are moments when cruelty crosses a line so deep that even the universe holds its breath. "What kind of evidence, counselor?" Judge Brighton's voice carried the bored irritation of someone accustomed to wasting time on pointless legal maneuvers. Hayes reached into his briefcase, his hands trembling slightly, a detail that would have warned a more observant judge that something significant was about to unfold. "A photograph, Your Honor. May I approach?" Brighton waved dismissively. This better not be some pathetic attempt to waste the court's time with irrelevant. "Your Honor," Hayes interrupted, his voice carrying new authority. "Before you see this evidence, I need to ask you something. Do you remember what justice means? Do you remember why you became a judge?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Brighton's face flushed with anger at the audacity. "Mr. Hayes, you're dangerously close to contempt of court. I don't need lectures about justice from someone defending a vagrant who can't even afford decent clothing." She gestured toward Marcus with obvious disgust. "Look at him. This man claims military service, but I see someone who's clearly given up on life, probably battling addiction, definitely mentally unstable. The idea that someone in his condition could have held any position of responsibility is laughable. The courtroom fell silent. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Furthermore, Brighton continued, her voice gaining momentum from her own righteousness. I'm tired of every homeless person in this district claiming PTSD as an excuse for their poor choices. Real soldiers don't end up sleeping in doorways. Real veterans find ways to contribute to society instead of becoming burdens on it. Marcus Wilson never flinched. His military training had prepared him for worse than verbal abuse from someone who'd never heard gunfire, never held a dying soldier, never made decisions that saved lives or ended them. But something shifted in his eyes. Not hurt, not anger, but something deeper. Recognition mixed with profound disappointment. Your Honor, Hayes said quietly, his voice now carrying the weight of impending revelation. You're about to see something that will change everything you think you know about justice, about service, and about the man you just humiliated. Brighton laughed, the sound harsh and brittle in the silent courtroom. Mr. Hayes, nothing you show me could possibly change my assessment of this situation. Some people are exactly what they appear to be. Failures who blame everyone else for their circumstances. She leaned forward, her final words delivered with surgical precision. And some people need to accept responsibility for the choices that led them to stand before this court as defendants instead of productive members of society. The photograph in Hayes' trembling hand was about to prove just how wrong a person could be. Sometimes the most dangerous moments are the quietest ones. Hayes approached the bench with the measured steps of a man carrying dynamite. The photograph in his hand seemed to pulse with potential energy, waiting to detonate everything Judge Brighton thought she knew about her world. Your Honor, he said, his voice now stripped of legal formality, what I'm about to show you will require you to confront some uncomfortable truths about yourself. Brighton snatched the photograph with irritated impatience. Mr. Hayes, I've had enough of your theatrical. The words died in her throat. The image showed a younger version of Marcus Wilson, but not as she'd ever seen him. This Marcus wore full military dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke of valor, sacrifice, and distinguished service. He was pinning an award on a teenage girl in military academy blues. The girl was beaming with pride, tears streaming down her face as the decorated officer smiled warmly and whispered something that made her laugh. The girl was her. 17-year-old Vanessa Brighton at her military academy graduation, the ceremony her wealthy parents had skipped for a charity gala. The photograph slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, floating to the floor like a feather carrying the weight of the world. Your Honor, Hayes continued, his voice now gentle as a funeral director's. May I present this evidence to the court? Brighton couldn't speak. Her perfectly maintained composure was cracking like ice under spring sun. The courtroom began to swim as Hayes moved toward the projection system. Marcus Wilson stood watching her with those same kind eyes she remembered from 15 years ago. Eyes that had seen her potential when no one else bothered to look. What she was about to learn would destroy everything she believed about herself, Hayes said quietly, and everything she thought she knew about the man she'd just humiliated. Truth has a way of arriving exactly when you least expect it and most need it. Hayes activated the projection system, and a photograph filled the wall behind the judge's bench. The entire courtroom could now see what had rendered their harsh young judge speechless. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes addressed the room with the gravity of a closing argument. You are looking at Colonel Marcus Thaddeus Wilson, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Brighton gripped her bench, as if the room might spin away from under her. The ceremony you see took place 15 years ago at the Virginia Military Institute. Hayes continued, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. What this photograph doesn't show is what happened after the ceremony ended. Brighton's mind reeled back to that day, the proudest moment of her young life, made bitter by her parents' absence. She'd stood alone after the ceremony, watching other graduates celebrate with their families, feeling abandoned and forgotten. What it doesn't show, Hayes pressed on, is how Colonel Wilson approached a teenage girl who was crying because her parents had chosen a social event over her graduation. What it doesn't show is the hour he spent talking to her about service, honor, and the importance of never forgetting where she came from. The memory hit Brighton like a physical blow. The kind stranger who'd appeared when she needed hope most. The man who'd treated her achievement as something worth celebrating when her own family couldn't be bothered. And what this photograph definitely doesn't show, Hayes's voice grew stronger, is the anonymous scholarship that appeared in Cadet Brighton's account 1 week later. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Brighton's face went white as bone. A scholarship that covered not just the remainder of her military education, but her entire law school tuition as well. A scholarship that made possible the career of the woman now sitting on this bench. The gavel fell from Brighton's trembling fingers, clattering against the floor with the finality of a coffin nail. Colonel Wilson asked for only one thing in return. Hayes continued relentlessly. That she remember the importance of service. Service to others, service to justice, service to those who cannot serve themselves. Brighton's vision blurred as 15 years of buried memories crashed over her like a tsunami. The weekly chess games during her final semester. His patient mentoring through her leadership struggles. His quiet pride in her achievements. The way he disappeared after graduation, leaving only a note about reassignment and a promise to always believe in her. What this photograph also doesn't reveal, Hayes's voice had grown steel-hard now, is Colonel Wilson's final deployment. The improvised explosive device that killed 3 of his soldiers while he was making a split-second decision between protecting civilians and protecting his unit. The room held its collective breath. The survivor's guilt that destroyed his mental health. The PTSD that cost him his career, his savings, his home, and nearly his life. Brighton began to sob, deep, wrenching sounds that echoed off the courtroom walls. The colonel has been homeless for 8 years, Hayes stated with quiet finality. 8 years of sleeping in doorways, of being moved along by security guards, of being treated like garbage by a society that forgot his service the moment he couldn't hide his pain. He turned to face Brighton directly, his ice blue eyes boring into her soul. The man you called incompetent paid for your education. The vagrant you mocked made your entire career possible. The failure you dismissed saved lives while you were still learning to drive. The truth hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, choking everyone who breathed it. Justice, when it finally arrives, is both beautiful and terrible to witness. Judge Vanessa Brighton sat frozen in her elevated chair, but she never felt smaller in her life. Her perfectly applied makeup ran in black rivers down her cheeks, her bright fuchsia blazer now seeming garish under the courtroom's harsh lights. The whispers from the gallery grew louder. Phones appeared to record her breakdown, and she could already see tomorrow's headlines writing themselves. Young judge humiliates war hero who paid for her education. Her career, built on efficiency, ruthlessness, and quick judgments, was crumbling in real time. Every harsh word she'd spoken was being replayed in the minds of everyone present. Every cruel dismissal, every heartless ruling, every moment of judicial arrogance was being weighed against the revelation of who she really was. A spoiled rich girl who'd forgotten the man who'd made her success possible. David, her court clerk, stared at her with something between disgust and pity. He'd watched her transform from an idealistic law graduate into something cold and calculating. And now he was seeing the cost of that transformation. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing he'd been part of a system that was about to crucify a genuine American hero for the crime of being homeless. Court security didn't know whether to maintain order or join the growing murmur of outrage rippling through the spectators. Brighton tried to speak, but only strangled sounds emerged. The words she'd used to destroy Marcus Wilson's dignity were now destroying her own reputation, her credibility, her future. "Your Honor," Hayes said quietly, though his voice carried to every corner of the room. "I believe this court owes Colonel Wilson an apology, not just for today's proceedings, but for a system that has failed him so completely. Brighton nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face, but the damage was done. Her prejudices had been exposed, her cruelty documented, her hypocrisy laid bare for everyone to see. The woman who'd entered that courtroom as a judge was leaving as something else entirely, a cautionary tale about power, privilege, and the danger of forgetting where you came from. Redemption, when it comes, often arrives wearing the face of those we've wronged. Marcus Wilson, Colonel Wilson, looked up at the broken woman on the bench with eyes that held no anger, no vindication, no desire for revenge. When he spoke, his voice carried the same gentle warmth that had comforted a frightened teenager 15 years ago. "Are you still playing chess on Thursdays, little Nessie?" The pet name shattered what remained of Brighton's composure. She was 17 again, sitting across from the finest man she'd ever known, learning about honor and sacrifice and the true meaning of service. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then louder through her tears, "I'm so sorry, Colonel." He smiled, the same kind smile that had once made a lonely girl believe in herself. "I know you are, little Nessie. I know you are. What would you have done in Wilson's place? Could you forgive someone who treated you like garbage? Let me know in the comments below.